So we're going to use the midpoint formula. They told us the endpoints, and we need to find the coordinates of our midpoint. So I'm going to just start by graphing these 2 points so that we can see what's going on. So negative 8, 7. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is right here. I want you to get in the habit of labeling your points. So that is A. And then B is at 5, 1, which is right here. Okay, so we want the segment between those. Since it says segment AB, that tells me I need to draw in that segment. So A to B is that segment here. I'm thinking that the midpoint is somewhere in this area, but we're going to use the formula to see about that. So the formula, once again, I'll write it up here, is x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Also, something to notice that this symbol in the middle right here, that is a comma. Just like how when you name points, you have to use a comma between the two numbers. It's not a plus sign. It's another mistake people use using this formula. It's kind of strange to use a formula and end up with 2 numbers as your answer. But remember, your answer is the location of a point. So it does need 2 coordinates. Okay, so if I plug in our numbers, this A is going to give you your x1 and your y1, and this B is going to give you your x2 and your y2. So our midpoint will be at negative 8 plus 5 for our 2 x's over 2. And for the 2 y's, we're going to do 7 plus 1 over 2. So to simplify this, the top of the fractions is where you're going to start. Negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3. And 7 plus 1 is 8. So negative 3 halves, if you leave it like that, that is fine, but it's a little easier to graph coordinates when they are decimals. So negative 3 divided by 2 is negative 1.5, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So according to the formula, let's see how good our picture is. The midpoint is at negative 1.5, so between negative 1 and negative 2, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like it's right there. So that's where M is, and it makes these two the same. Okay, so that was one type of question. Another type of question is this, where I give you a midpoint and an endpoint, and you have to figure out the other endpoint. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways to use it. Okay, so I gave you a hint up here. Sometimes it's easier to use logic instead of the midpoint formula. Let's see if we can figure this out. I'll do it with the midpoint formula first, and then we'll talk about the logic to do it without the midpoint formula. So the midpoint is at 2, negative 3. That's right here, putting M next to it. And the endpoint is at 4, 1. So that's P. Okay, now a lot of people do not read the directions here, and they will assume that they're supposed to find the midpoint between these two. But we try to help you and always use an M to signify the midpoint. So if there's ever an M in one of these questions, you usually already have the midpoint. Okay, so if you're just looking at it quickly, look at the names of the points. If there's an M, you can bet that you already know what the midpoint is. So you need to do a little bit extra. Okay, so if M is the midpoint, that means that the other endpoint has to be somewhere down in this area, okay, because I want to make a segment so that the M is in the middle. Okay, so let's start with the midpoint formula. If I write it down up here, and we're going to fill in what we know. And y1 plus. Okay, so the midpoint is the answer. It's going to be what goes in here. But the other endpoint is going to be our x1 and y1. Okay, so we have that the answer should be 2, negative 3. And filling in x1 and y1, we get 4 plus x, you don't need the x2, there's only one x now, over 2, and 1 plus y over 2. Okay, so this looks, it's organized so that things are kind of on top of each other here with the parentheses. This is actually two different equations in this information. So the first one is that 4 plus x over 2 has to equal the x coordinate of my midpoint. So that has to equal 2. And the other one is 1 plus y over 2 has to equal -3. Okay, so to solve this equation, both of the equations, they have the same series of steps. You're going to multiply by 2 to get rid of the fraction because it's divided by 2 right now. That gives us 4 plus x equals 4. And then you would subtract 4. So that gives me, those cancel out, x equals 0. And over here, multiply by 2. You get 1 plus y equals -6. Subtract your 1, and you get y is -7. Okay, so with that information, we get that the point has to be at 0, -7 for the other endpoint. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right here. Did it tell us what the name of that point was? Q. So this would be our segment. Okay. Now, like I said, there is an easier way to do these. If you love doing algebra, then go ahead and do all that algebra there. But I know that the midpoint, let's pretend we don't know that it's at 0, -7. I know that if I travel from P to M, I'm going to have to travel the exact same distance in the exact same direction to go from M to Q. Okay, so if you are standing at P and you walk to M, you have to do the exact same thing to get to the other endpoint over here, since M is exactly in the middle and all three of them are on the same line. So you kind of use the concept of slope for this one. So if I go from P to M, I can see that I go down 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I go from P to M, I have to go down 4. Okay, so then I am at this spot right here. And then I have to go to the left too. So then I go this way too. Okay, so what you're going to do is take this kind of rule of how to move from P to M and do the exact same thing to move from M to the other endpoint. So 1, 2, 3, 4, I went down 4, and then to the left 2, and I got that the point has to be right here. This is going to be Q. Okay, so then if I draw in the segment, that looks about right, and that's at 1. So then after that, it asks you to figure out the coordinates. So I have to figure out where this is. That is at 0. And count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's at 0, 7. And that's all you have to do. So you could do all this algebra if that makes more sense to you. So that's one option that you have to do of how to do the problem. Or you can do the way I did over here in the graph, where you just figure out the slope once and then do it again to move to the next point.